Well, good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's morning here on Mystery Island on the east coast of the United States, but it's not morning where Riley is. But Riley has consented to spend an hour with us catching up. It's been almost 2 months, and I am just delighted to have you back. So, welcome back, Riley Waggaman, AKA Edward Slavsquat.
Thanks so much for having me back, John. It's always a lot of fun talking. So I'm glad we got to meet up again.
Yeah, and are you in a undisclosed location, or can you disclose where approximately where you are, just for our general reference?
I'm still hunkered down in Tbilisi, Georgia for now, but subject to change, hopefully.
Okay, well, okay, good luck with that. It sounds like you are looking forward to a change. Um, in I love to follow your Substack, and you also are kind enough to give everybody a tease on it on your Twitter feed. So people, if you haven't found it yet, get to Riley on Twitter. The most recent one really, I think, struck me as important to my understanding of what's going on. And you're addressing a man named Hermann Greff and
Mm.
Sparebank. Now, some of my other colleagues have been looking into Sparebank and see a Rothschild connection there. Um, and we, of course, have the interesting character of Schroeder and his connections with the German and the Gazprom and all that. But so I thought, if you would, could you enlarge a bit upon who is Hermann Greff, and what does he have? What power does he have? Is he a puppet, or just tell us a little more about him from what you can see?
Well, just really briefly, Gref is he actually was born in Kazakhstan during the Soviet Union. He was born to German parents who were actually uh, relocated, let's use that word, to Kazakhstan during World War II. And Gref is an interesting character because he was part of this liberal clique that started in St. Petersburg in the 90s and ended up in Moscow. And I mean, Putin sort of had a very similar story. He was sort of involved in these similar circles. Nabiullina, who is the chairman of the Bank of Russia, also goes back a long time with Gref. They all sort of orbited around this guy Sobchak, who was the mayor of St. Petersburg in the 90s, and he was sort of a early political patron, I would say, of 90s Russia. Anyway, he Gref had this sort of incredible meteoric meteoric rise in sort of the Russian business and politics. I mean, he ended up on the board of some of the largest Russian companies the by 1999 he was on the board of directors of like Aeroflot, and I think even I want to say even Gazprom, maybe Gazprom Neft possibly. At that point he had he was got a foot into the door in the federal government, and he was working as like a deputy minister of economic development. They have so many sort of ministries and sub ministries, but basically what ended up happening is that Gref uh, was handed a job as CEO of Sparebank in 2000. Oh my gosh, my numbers. I want to say 2007 or 2008. And this was also around the time when Gref started getting pretty heavily involved in the World Economic Forum. And this guy became by 2011, I believe, he became a member of the board of trustees uh, with the World Economic Forum. And he wrote the foreword to Klaus Schwab's. He wrote the Russian language like forward to Klaus Schwab's first book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which I think is just called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. So this was, I think, 2016, maybe 2017. Anyway, this guy he's just a very, very peculiar character. And it's interesting how you don't hear a lot about him, at least in English language, sort of alternative indie media, but he's a tremendously important character to keep an eye on if you want to understand Russia better, because he heads Russia's largest bank, which is majority state owned. He's been orbiting sort of these centers of power in Russia for a very, very long time. And because he is the CEO of Russia's largest bank, he has tremendous influence over like all aspects of life. And Sberbank has shown that in really incredible ways, especially just over the last few years, where they get involved with things that you think a bank wouldn't be involved with. Like, for example, developing a coronavirus vaccine, or, biometric payment systems for children to pay for school lunches, or, all sorts of weird stuff like AI development. He's there. Spare is involved in everything now. So this guy's he's still up to his little tricks. And I just wrote recently about, he gave this conference where he comes out and says, if you want to stay relevant in the, going forward, we got to focus on the augmented technology. We have to focus on, the AI, sort of like biotech stuff, 5 and 6G technology. And what can I say? It's Hermann Greff.
Yeah, I've shared the screen here so that folks could see the first page of your Substack article, and friendly banker wants to turn Russians into cyborgs. That's the summary, I guess, of what you just said. And all of this, is coordinated with the World Economic Forum. What about Sberbank itself, and how is that? I guess let's just go ahead and go to the ultimate question right now. What's going on with Nord Stream, and is Gerhard Schroeder somebody that's trying to make a deal? Is all of this stuff, the whole Ukraine war, this kind of a push-pull thing just until they get a deal on the Nord Stream, or is it all really going to turn into a conflagration along the whole border of Russia? Which way?
John, you're putting me in a tight spot here. Ask me all the tough questions. So first of all, though, I just want to say, just to make my position clear here. While it is absolutely true that everything that comes out of Greff's mouth is like a press release from Davos, I can't say that it's absolutely 100% coordinated with the World Economic Forum. I don't know. Nobody knows. But the point is, it's like people play this game where it's like, well, Russia, like all formal ties have been cut between Russia and the World Economic Forum, and this is a great victory for humanity. Well, okay, it sounds cool on paper, but like if they're doing the exact same thing, it's less cool, right? And so I think that's sort of what we should be focusing on. It's like, if you're doing the same thing, I don't even care what the agreement or non-agreement or rivalry is. There's obviously a problem here. To address your question about like Nord Stream and the bizarre energy suicide pact going on in the West, I have no idea. I am shocked and terrified. I really am. It really feels like we are witnessing like a very conscious sort of self-destruct mode thing going on, like where just there's no longer any room for just basic common sense and decency, and everything is just slowly crumbling before our eyes. And it seems like they want this, though. That's the thing. The only thing I would say on this, and I'm not an expert on Nord Stream or oil pipeline geopolitics. Although I would point out that it's quite interesting how through this whole Ukraine crisis, Russia has still was pumping gas right through Ukraine this entire time, right? So
Yeah,
on the one hand, yeah.
what kind of war is this anyway? I mean, that's
Well,
what I want to know. I mean, do
you,
you want to kill the enemy and make peace and start over, or do you just want the war to go on?
well,
And
yeah. There's like, sorry, keep going. Keep going.
it's just like World War II, really. You know, when we were fueling the Luftwaffe from Standard Oil and sending it through South America, but business as usual. The whole concept of wars happen, but business is business, right?
Yeah. No, it's very let's just say it's very suspicious. I would have to put it that way to be honest. It's and I know that now people are saying, well, this shows that the EU has gone off the cliff, and because and Russia's just trying to cooperate, and this shows that there's some rift. Well, okay, I don't know, maybe, but let's be honest here, though. I mean, part of this alleged, Klaus Schwab backed or supported or endorsed plot is that there's going to be this radical energy transformation, right? Like, and this seems to be doing the job pretty well. It looks like we're heading exactly towards what everyone was warning about for the last 2 years. And you just, I don't want to make any, I'm not trying to say this is what's happening because I don't know. I don't think anyone knows for sure, but man, it's quite coincidental. It's quite coincidental that we're seeing something so radical and seemingly unimaginable happening, just like as if it was just scheduled. It's like, well, all right, it's like September, time to like cut off all the oil supplies and make everything go crazy. Like what's going on here? I don't know.
I don't know if you ever delve into the more esoteric side of these things, but I've just been enjoying a book by a man named William Stewart, Stuart,
Mm-hmm.
who's written a number of books along the lines of there's a secret college of people that have been controlling things, and they plan things 120 years ahead. So they're
Wow.
so by the time their plot comes into activity, they're all dead. So there's nobody that we can blame. But it just so there's one answer is that yeah, it is actually unfolding according to a long plan, from Albert Pike and all of the great heroes of Freemasonry and Rosicrucian lore. And the more I study this stuff, the more I find myself thinking, there's an awful lot more than coincidences going on here. I think there is some serious planning that's been done, whether in this case or not, who knows? But with what you just told us about Hermann Greff, Greff, I do think you're right. And wh- so his family was German and was moved to Kazakhstan in World
Right,
War
moved. Well, they are forcibly. What is the word they use? I forget now. But basically, they were taken from Germany and relocated to Kazakhstan. This is
Why?
it was part of this sort of. I think it was this, sort of resettlement program the Soviets had. Right? They just like, oh, all right, you're gonna like go help us build stuff in Kazakhstan now. Like, thanks for
Yeah,
playing. So yeah.
yeah. That brings up the kind of the dark side of the Belt and Road, doesn't it? That um, you know, just because you can increase the commerce and make news cities and towns along the way, and it looks like it could be a wonderful thing. But if you put it in the hands of people that that have been running the railroads in Asia for the past 200 years, it's not necessarily the best plan for humanity. And I guess that goes back to what I was thinking out before the show. What did I want to ask you? And here's what I want to ask you about from your perspective. in as an observer of Russian media and people and culture and Ukraine as well, is America still look like the last best hope of Earth, or have we lost uh, our position as the city on the hill?
This is what I would say. As first of all, as an American, and as someone who has spent a lot of time in Russia, and as someone who spent a lot of time in a media space where you see a lot of disaffected Americans looking to Russia as like this is our these are the guys, this is the government, this is the country that is gonna save us, which is a theme that I read constantly. Um, Russia is not anti-America. Is people view it as like anti-America? Like Russia is anti-America, or Russia is the anti-Germany, or Russia is the anti-UK. Russia is Russia. It's like a super old country that has existed long before the United States and might even outlast the United States. And it has its own problems, and it views problems not necessarily through the prism of NATO or EU gas fights or whatever. It's like they also have their own stuff, and they have their own issues, their own internal issues, their own problems. It's a whole other separate world. And what I would say to people is like, first of all, don't trick yourself into thinking that Russia exists like to as the foil to all of your problems, because it's way more complicated than that. And you shouldn't don't put all your like eggs in one basket. And also, Russia has other things it wants to do besides like be the you know the country that's going to save the world. You talk to any Russian, they're not even thinking about this kind of stuff. But to get to your point, the United States really does have a lot going for it. And I really, really encourage Americans, like Westerners in general, but Americans specifically, to stop being such a bummer and so self-deprecating and so negative about their own country, because the United States has a really beautiful tradition and of just like, first of all, like civic service and like basically the defense of like individualism and like just the most basics that we have, that unfortunately in the United States and elsewhere are just being fed through the wood chipper right now. But you can't lose sight of the good stuff that the United States still has. And I understand that people say, well, it's all over, it's all gone. I don't think so. And you have to understand something too, is that in Russia, there's no tradition like this. Like, are you going to look to Russia for like individual rights? That's crazy. Like, Russia is not a country that has any sort of precedent with like defending individual sovereignty or whatever you want to call it. Like, no, that's not what Russia does. And Russia does its own thing, and it has its own legacy and an honorable and dignified legacy in many respects, but that's not what Russia does. And so I really, really encourage people to understand that sort of there is a lot going for the United States, and the United States still does have aspects where it's probably more decentralized, definitely more decentralized than Russia if we're talking about the government. You still have like the ability to organize locally and make changes on the local level, which you do not see in Russia, I'm sorry to say, and work with that. Like, take advantage of that and be a model and example to the rest of the world, and stop like putting yourselves down so much. Like, embrace the suckiness of 2022 and just try to do your best. That's my advice to Americans. So,
Wow, I feel like our whole country was just laying on the couch. All right. Stop beating yourself up, America. No,
yeah,
that was exactly what I was going to ask you, and you already answered it. But just to emphasize it, I, I've been saying the past week or so that there hasn't been any individual freedom in the world anywhere before the Constitution of the United States of America. And I challenge anybody to show me a civilization anywhere in history where I'm wrong. And ever since then, I still don't think there's any place that guarantees, on the basis of what Thomas Jefferson said, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we are the only country in the world that has that as our fundamental constitutional uh, foundation, then we really are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And with that as our basic founding documents, it's like we're living in a structure in which the roof is caved in, the walls have fallen down, the windows have all been cracked, but we've still got the foundation, we've still got the basic structure, and we've got to hang on to that and rebuild it, because it is very, very fragile right now. And it's being pushed this way and that with the economy and the wars and the incredible media manipulation of the minds of your patient on the couch. I mean, we're being psychologically manipulated, and have been, for 100 years. As you know, as a journalist, this goes back to Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays and the decisions of the Wilson administration to bring in this kind of management of the people by narrative. And I really do believe that the emperor's new clothes are starting to fall off before our eyes, as people can follow your advice and stop beating yourself up and realize that we really are the vanguard of individual freedom. And without individual freedom, there is no kind of freedom. There's nothing. Like you're saying about Russia, or my favorite example is Great Britain. You don't have individual rights like we have, even in the mother of democracy, as they like to think of themselves. They're not. They're still subjects. They're not citizens. And that's, you inspired a rant from me there, and I appreciate that, because it does need to be said. And my newest phrase that I picked up from my social media is this: liberal totalitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned liberals earlier in describing the politicians centered around Putin in St. Petersburg, but what we have is liberals who are enforcing the totalitarian state's rules. And that's not what Thomas Jefferson expected us to be doing, 220, 30 years later. So those are my comments.
Well said. I endorse your message, John.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And about the special military operation in Ukraine, to what extent is that in the media where you are and in Russian media generally?
Well, look, I mean, it's well, in Russia, of course, it's everywhere. And yeah, I mean, it's still the number one thing that Russians are going to be talking about for sure. I think too that there's no doubt that people are starting to, I would say, worry about where this is headed. And I mean, this started, of course, you could trace this, the questions that started being asked that I think need to be asked you found them in Russian media going back from April, basically early April. But now it's getting harder and harder to deny that the problem that we're now facing in Ukraine is that what Putin said, which is that we went into Ukraine to stop the formation of a permanent anti-Russia, which on paper sounds like quite a noble undertaking, is not being accomplished. And the demilitarization of Ukraine, well, Ukraine has never been more militarized, ever. The denazification of Ukraine, well, okay, unfortunately, let's be real here. Are there Nazis in Ukraine? Yes. How many Nazis need to be killed before it's denazified? It's an abstraction, unfortunately. And also, to make it more difficult to accomplish this task, is that before February 24th, you still had political parties in Ukraine that were advocating for friendly relations with Russia. It's now illegal to even be neutral or friendly or even neutral towards Russia now in Ukraine. You could get lynched, basically, if you publicly support Russia. And by support, I mean just you want to have normal relations with Russia in Ukraine. Unfortunately, this conflict doesn't seem to be accomplishing what Russia said it was launched to accomplish. And at this point, it looks like, assuming that they take all of Donbass, that might be it. And that means that the rest of Ukraine is now a permanent anti-Russia, which is what this conflict was supposed to prevent. And I can tell you that a lot of Russians understand this, and a lot of Russians have relatives in Ukraine, and a lot of Russians are wondering, was it worth it? Was it worth it? There is a sunk cost fallacy, and it definitely applies to every single military conflict that has ever been fought, where basically you have to make sure that, what you put into it, what was it, you get a result that is fitting for the investment, let's put it that way. I don't know. And I'm not saying that I don't understand why the Russians went in. I'm not saying that I was in Donetsk for, not very, very long. I've talked to the, crying grandmothers who were cowering in basements as artillery shells went over. I get it. But unfortunately, I don't see a good exit here for anyone. And if you're really committed to this idea that Ukraine and Russia are brotherly nations, and I tend to believe this, how do we reconcile? Where's the reconciliation here? How do we how does this happen? How do we restore this brotherly feeling after this conflict, assuming that it ends? So I don't know.
Well, it relates to what we were saying earlier about the greater geopolitical situation, and whether is all this a big coordinated way to take Europe down?
Right.
And if, as this keeps dragging on, and as the West keeps throwing, more and more of its chips on the table, the the likelihood of a settlement, it gets more and more remote. And as you described, the mood of especially what's said in Ukraine about, you can't, as you said, you can't even indicate that you might be pro-Russian. That brings me to one of the big issues we've been struggling with here, and that is this blacklist that has been issued by a part of the Ukrainian government, but actually really related to the U.S. Government's efforts to control propaganda here. And it's a Ukrainian name, so I can't remember the name of it, but it's a list of journalists that are anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian, and the charge is that they're engaging in information terrorism.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
what a charged word that is, to say, information terrorism, because then you start invoking the anti-terrorist squads, that are, at the service of these governments and behind the scenes. And that relates to the question of Alexandra Dugina and the assassination of her a couple of weeks ago. Uh, the appearance of these black sun emblems on the assassins or would-be assassin of Kirchner in Argentina this past week, along with that same image on the shooter in Buffalo a month or two ago, and the Christchurch mosque uh, assassination guy back in New Zealand last year. These all appear to create a real uh, a dimension to the idea of being on a blacklist that is really, really chilling and potentially uh, uh, um, it could potentially effective, because it could terrorize people into just not speaking out, just as you say the Ukrainian government has told its people that they cannot speak out. Um, is that blacklist? Is that something that's on your radar screen? And what if you got any comments on that?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It's like I forget the terms, like Mirovica or something. I
Exactly.
forget the name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mirovitz.
Yeah. I remember. I'm very familiar with this list. I know people who are on this list. Look, I mean, obviously, it's disgusting. Um, no normal human should support these kind of basically terror tactics against people who simply have a different perspective. Like this is not the way that normal human beings should, like engage in the marketplace of ideas. Oh, you have an idea that I don't like. I'm gonna like dox you, put your address online. I hope someone kills you. It's like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way of like playing delicately with ideas. But and the thing is, it's like we see this everywhere. Nobody is able to have a normal conversation anymore. Like this is the most extreme. This is like probably one of the more extreme. Like this is maybe as bad as it gets. But in general, I mean, just look at like the weirdos on. I don't have Facebook anymore, but every time I go on Facebook, people are just breathing down their each other's necks, like going cuckoo, just because someone thinks something different that isn't socially acceptable or politically correct or whatever. And what happened? It's such a bizarre phenomenon to see everyone. The nations are at each other's throats. Everyone's going bananas. I don't know what happened, John. it's it's really too bad.
Well, it's starting to really come apart, because as I get older and see the younger generations coming along, they really don't have the traditions of that I have, that I got when I was growing up, and the whole domination of everybody's life by the media, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, and even probably subliminally then, you know, uh, sending you some nice little alpha waves while you're sleeping. Um, this control thing is getting more and more and more evident.
Mm.
But it's the other thing about Ukraine is it's also just a resource play, is it not? With BlackRock and Vanguard coming in, as I understand, these great big corporate behemoths And, you know, you create chaos, and then you come in, you buy up the land cheap, and that now you own all that great black dirt that's so famous around the world for being the breadbasket of Asia, or the breadbasket of Russia, you used to be. Um, is It's also that, isn't it? Have you looked at it from that point of view, that it's just a corporate play in which war happens to be the instrument of choice?
I mean, I haven't really looked into that aspect of it very deeply at all, but I would assume that in any situation where, cities and regions are being leveled to the ground, that there's someone waiting on the sidelines to move in and gobble everything up for pennies on the dollar. I mean, this is modern business. This is how it works. Look, I mean, it's just, more and more, it's just. I have to say this as someone, as an observer of this conflict. It's like there seems to be this tendency where um, people, whether they want to admit it or not, like recognize that war is bad, and like we want to avoid it. We don't like it. There was this assumption that this conflict in Ukraine would be over fairly quickly and would be more or less bloodless. I think that's what many people assumed in the first few weeks of this conflict. And now I feel like there's this transition where people are sort of taking this weird sort of Machiavellian like position with like, well, you don't understand, like the longer it goes on, like the better it is for Russia, and it's all part of this plan, just trust the plan, it's all going according to plan. I just it gives me a bad feeling, and it makes me feel like people are they're just not taking into account the true human toll of this conflict, and they're basically doing it just to score points on the internet. And like I said before, if you really are committed to this idea that Ukraine should be part, or should either be in Russia's sphere of influence, or should at least have friendly relations with Russia, or at least be neutral, you have to consider Ukraine's. You have to have concern for the average Ukrainian. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. You know. Otherwise, what's the point of this war? And so we go online and you see people on both sides, on like the pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian side, and they're posting videos of like dead Ukrainian soldiers or dead Russian soldiers or things blowing up. It's like, wow, man, you guys are bloodthirsty. You guys are bloodthirsty. And especially, I have to say this, especially on like the pro-Russia side, you realize that every dead Ukrainian soldier, that means a sobbing mother back home, a pissed off father, probably kids, wife. You're creating generational hate. Generational. Every single one of these videos that you guys are like laughing or slobbering over is just making it worse. And that's more and more how I see this conflict. It just seems like an absolutely horrific human tragedy, and I don't think we're really like processing what this means, especially for Russia and Ukraine. And people keep viewing it through this like NATO bad prism. Like, okay, like we get it. You also realize that now this war has basically expanded NATO to Finland and Sweden. So exactly, that's not exactly a 5D power play on Russia's end, I would have to say. So I don't know, John. Like I commend you too for like trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. I can't even get that far anymore. It's just too depressing. Like I don't even want to know what BlackRock is doing in Ukraine. Don't tell me if you know.
Yeah, I am not sure either, but I do get that same kind of conspiratorial mood, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah, for sure.
it's impossible to avoid it. What the I don't see those videos you described, but I see the teases from them. When I'm looking, what's new on YouTube today, and you'll see one that says, "Oh, look at this Russian tank gets
Right.
exploded by this Ukrainian missile," and like everybody's like supposed to applaud, I suppose, or vice versa.
Right.
And I see that as a kind of an invocation of the reptilian spirit inside of each of us, that we have this reptilian adrenaline based fight or flight thing. And when we're starting to get into the war mentality, then we start allowing ourselves to kind of enjoy a very kind of physical, lusty, but you know, but it disengages the mind and the conscience, and allows us to slip into a reptilian war mode. And some people, war take pleasure in inducing that mode in themselves, while not really thinking about, hey, that guy in that tank had a mother.
Yep.
That guy in that tank has three little kids that are going to grow up without a dad. He can disengage from that and live in a fantasy world. And I really think that's been encouraged by our internet provider people, like DARPA and all. Let's make another gruesome war game with zombies in it, and somehow train young minds to enjoy that. But it's also relates, if I may, to another subject, and that's the idea of the Totenkopf that's associated. Most people say with the Nazis, but it's much older than that, and it really is a symbol of, I will kill you. I'm a soldier. I'm here to make you dead. And if you don't get out of my way, you're going to end up as a skull and crossbones, and I'll just put you up on my shelf as a trophy. That ancient, bold, courageous, yes, I will kill you statement on the top of my, helmet is not necessarily a Nazi style kooky, uh, thing, the way it's has been portrayed since Nazism. Nevertheless, it's the same thing. It's the I will call my reptilian mind, I will call my reptilian forces out, and you will see the dark side of me if you don't get the hell out of my way right now. You know, and that kind of standing up and threat, like animals, posing at each other. Uh, the rams, the big old ram and the young ram are going to display, and that's what I think is going on there. But the effect of it uh, is not limited to what these people are thinking when they put these thoughts together. But I think it's really worth recognizing that by making these things available, the people who do control the internet and our media generally are encouraging minds to think that way and to disengage from our consciences and our connections, to spiritual and moral values. End of speech.
No, totally. And I really do. It does honestly feel like we're being conditioned, you know? We're being conditioned to not only hate each other for no apparent reason whatsoever, but basically to be completely, what is even the word, like, you're no longer, like, extreme violence no longer causes any emotion in you. It's even maybe even enjoyable to see it happen. And this scares me like tremendously. And unfortunately, I feel like these phenomena are probably going to get a lot more intense before we see the other end of it, which is unfortunate. Definitely unfortunate.
Yeah, that and a big pile of cocaine, can really keep a war going, I think. It's a horrific scenario, and I the the other, I guess I was just going to mention that back in the spring when this was all um, still looking manageable, a lot of the experts that I've seen were suggesting that the answer is going to be just that Russia would divide Ukraine at the Dnieper River,
Mm.
and that would provide a natural boundary that would suffice to make Russia feel secure. Um, but the other side of it is that it doesn't leave Ukraine with much of an economy left, and the likelihood then would be that Poland would come in and take the part, at least around Lviv, that's has been traditionally in historical times Polish anyway, and that way Ukraine kind of just disappears. Was that a pipe dream? Was that just too simple an idea? Do you think that Russia may still be thinking that they're going to take up to the Dnieper River um, uh, once they get through this current bout of counteroffensives?
Look, I want to make this really clear. I think anything is possible. I think 2022 is the year of anything is possible. I do not want to discount anything.
Yeah.
If that happens, I will be the first one to say, I didn't think that would happen, but it happened. And welcome to 2022 or 2023 or whatever. But if someone put a gun to my head and said, you know, how far is Russia getting in Ukraine, or how much territory is Russia going to take in Ukraine? I think we're basically seeing the end of it. I really do. I think that the best Russia is going to hope for now is to take Donbass. And I want to make this also really clear. This was a conscious decision by Russia because it decided not to go all in. It made the conscious decision to not use conscripts. I'm not talking about recruiting people for the war. I'm talking about Russians who were conscripted into the army as part of a mandatory year of service, who were embedded into the army, part of the army's function. Like, to make the army work properly, you need the conscripts. And then the conscripts weren't allowed to go into Ukraine. Now, was that the humane thing to do? Maybe, but you also have an army that is like missing an arm, you know? And they did other things too. And people will say, well, this is like to protect lives, or they're going slowly because, there are many, I've heard many reasons for why they did these things, and some of them are more compelling than others. But the reality is that a frozen conflict or some sort of World War I era conflict where you're losing dozens of lives to fight over a kilometer or less of land, that doesn't seem very humane to me. Like, I think it works both ways here. I think that maybe a quick and more, let's just use the term that should be used, brutal conflict could have been infinitely more merciful than what we're seeing now. We don't know. We don't know how this one ends. And that's the scary part. It's like, how does it end? And man, again, and just to be really clear, I'm saying this as someone who really, really wants the best for Russia and for Ukraine. And the problem is, it's like, okay, well, how do we make that happen? And in this scenario, like where Ukraine might get like absorbed by Poland, so what does that create? Does that create like a mega anti-Russia Polish state? I mean, what are we talking about here? Again, the point is, it's like, if the point was to create a neutral Ukraine, or like a neutral brotherly state on Russia's border that couldn't be used as a bludgeon by the West, is that being accomplished? And I think that maybe the situation can change, but as of now, come on, let's be honest. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's the exact opposite. Like the formation of the anti-Russia is happening before our eyes. You know, it's being solidified. So that's really disappointing and sad and tragic, and it's not what I want.
Anti-Russia and a generational
hatred that will take decades to heal, decades. Absolutely, yeah. No one should be. There should be no illusions about this. Even if the war ended today, it'll so much healing will need to occur before there's like normal relations between Ukraine and Russia. So, you know.
It sounds to me like the Ukrainian government is fairly well supported by the Ukrainian people then. And that is, I think, the key, because at the beginning of the war, we saw the Russian army go in on a special operation directly to Kiev. And
Yeah.
the idea was, at least we're told that the idea was that, hey, the Ukrainian people have had enough of this Zelensky government and these people that he's associated with, and they'll welcome us, and we'll help them reform their government, and then we'll leave, and it'll be a peaceful thing with flowers and kisses. And that was either just propaganda to get the Russian people to go along with it in the first place, or was a gross failure of Russian intelligence services to understand the depth of support that the Zelensky government really had at the time. And now, as you've pointed out so well, it can only have grown with the sacrifices of the people in the war.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's a really great statistic to show you why. This is why I'm concerned, all right? First of all, I don't like Zelensky, okay? I'm not a fan of Zelensky. I'm not a fan of the Ukrainian government. But you go back to November, Zelensky had like a 30%, like 33% approval rating. They did a recent poll, I think last month, 91%. 91% in support of Zelensky. And now all of the like not insane political parties in Ukraine have been banned. Like all of the I'm forgetting the name of it, but it was like the major sort of like pro-Russia political party, which was not like we want to be part of Russia, but just we want normal relations with Russia. It had a large number of seats in parliament, gone, banned. You can't even be part of this organization. You can't even organize for this idea anymore. So this is what I'm saying. It's like all of the worst elements of like the Ukrainian sort of, project that people are so opposed to has been galvanized by this conflict, and it has made Zelensky's political position stronger over the last 6 months. And like you said, I mean, it's how did this happen? And I mean, well, maybe we'll never know, but I do believe that Russia really thought that this would be another Crimea. They thought that it would be more or less bloodless. They thought that the Ukrainian army would throw down its arms, that the regime in Kiev would flee, and then that would be the end of it. And it didn't work out that way. And now we're here in September, and well, what can be said,
Well, Boris Johnson's out, but we've still got the Biden administration, and then the whole idea of NATO continuing just throw everything into the Ukrainian army. That's what keeps it going, and that the sacrifice that the European people are now going to make over the winter is going to cause them to resent Russia, because the media is going to be controlled there as well.
Right.
And this doesn't look good in terms of how, because we don't have the media going out there and doing journalism. They're just doing pep talks for their own government sides, and it's tragic. It's like, our American Civil War is what I kept thinking of when you talked about how generations of resentment is going to follow, and that certainly was the case in the United States. And it wasn't until World War I came along that another opportunity to feel like a unified country came along, but that's 60 years after the Civil War, and the resentments still linger in lots of parts of the country, and that is that's something that will be with our grandchildren's children. Well, something perhaps as we get back to trying to wrap it up, whoever's behind this has no regard for the future of humanity. I think it's something else. It's either a big resource play, or it's just a power play to see if they can control everybody through these totalitarian tentacles. And it's only through, people like you that we can try to shed the light. We're kind of in Plato's cave looking at the shadows, but on the other hand, we all have different perspectives, and maybe we're in different caves, and so we can actually work together and sort this thing out before it's too late.
Yeah, that's such a great closing message, John, because I do feel like that most people really they do want, like, they're good faith people. They want good outcomes for the world. They're not sociopaths like the weirdos doing these weirdo things. I would just really encourage people to, like, listen more, talk more, and be less judgmental, especially on the internet where people get so fired up if you just have like a little, like, you just see things a little bit differently and people go berserk. And just, guys, like, you got to realize that we're all pros. I'm sorry, at the end of the day, I don't care who you are. You're watching this, you're just a pro like me and John. We're in pro world, and, like, let's start working together, like pro pride, So I don't know. We'll be okay. We'll be okay, John. Don't worry.
I'm sure we will, and thank you again, Edward Slavsquat, for your wisdom and looking into the crystal ball a little bit, even though it looks a little dark right now. I think you're right. We'll be okay, and especially if we keep on talking. As one of my guests last week, Anton Chaikin, who's writing, if you don't know, you really should. He closed our show with the message of what we really need is love. We need to love one another.
Yeah.
And what's missing is sympathy. And as you emphasized with the families of the poor soldiers that will be killed or maimed, the sympathy has got to be there. And if we all exerted it, I think the war would have to stop.
Yep.
And we'll leave it right there. Thanks again, Riley Waggaman. And remember, guys, support him at Substack. He's doing it out there for us, and he does rely on our support. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John.
All right. Bye-bye. The Ospreys fly off.